This set of slides discusses portfolio after-tax returns. In reality, portfolios are subject to a variety of different taxes depending on the types of securities they hold, how frequently they are traded, and the direction of returns. The different taxing schemes can be integrated into a single framework in which a portfolio's investment return is received in the form of dividends, which we call, and the proportion of dividends is designated as P with a little d, and taxed at a rate of T with a little d. Another portion is received in the form of interest income, proportion of I, and taxed at such a rate of TI. And another portion is taxed as a realized capital gain, PCG, at the rate of TCG. The remainder of an investment's return is unrealized capital gain, the tax on which is deferred until ultimately recognized at the end of the investment horizon. And we can write the after-tax annual return as R star equals R times 1 minus the proportion and tax rate of the interest, minus the proportion and tax rate of dividends, minus the proportion and tax rate of capital gains. Here's an example. So ZK has a portfolio with a market value of 100,000. By the end of the year, the portfolio is worth 108,000 before taxes. Interest of $400 and dividends of $2,000 were reinvested into the portfolio. During the year, KH has $3,600 worth of realized capital gains. Dividends and realized capital gains are taxed at 15% annually, while interest is taxed at 35% annually. Alright, there's a few things that we need to work out. Firstly, we need to work out the rate of return. And we do that by taking the amount we ended with minus what we started with divided by what we start with. So it's 108,000 minus 100,000 divided by 100,000, and we get 8% return. That's our R in our formula. The proportion of interest is $400 received divided by the total of $8,000, and that's the difference between what we ended with and what we started with. 5% interest. The proportion of interest income is 5%. The proportion of dividends is 2,000 divided by 8,000 is 25%. The proportion of capital gains is 3,600 divided by 8,000 is 45%. We also need to know the tax rate. So the tax rates on dividends and realized capital gains are 15% annually. Here they are in our formula. Well, interest is taxed at 35% annually. And here are the proportions. Alright, so we can plug the information into our formula and we get a return of 7.02%. Also note that what's left over, the unrealized gain, is $2,000. The total gain minus interest, dividends, and capital gain. So effective capital gains tax rate. So a portion of the investment return has avoided annual taxation, and tax on that portion would then be deferred until the end of the investment horizon. Holding the tax rate on capital gains constant, the impact of deferred capital gains taxes will be diminished as more of the return is taxed annually. Conversely, as less of the return is taxed annually, more of the return will be subject to deferred capital gains. The impact of deferred capital gains taxes using an effective capital gains tax rate that adjusts the capital tax rate gain, TCG, to reflect previously taxed dividends, income, or realized capital gains can be expressed as this first formula here. This is the impact of deferred capital gains taxes by adjusting the capital gains tax rate, TCG, to reflect the taxes that we've already paid on dividends, income, and realized capital gains. So we've seen some of this before, 1 plus r to the power of n minus, and in brackets 1 plus r to the power of n minus 1 times the tax rate star, which we saw in the last formula. This tax rate, the portfolio after tax returns, minus 1 minus B times the tax on the capital gains. The adjustment to the capital gains tax rate takes into account of the fact that some of the investment return had previously been taxed as interest income, dividends, or realized capital gains before the end of the investment horizon and will not be taxed again as capital gain. The future after-tax accumulation for each unit of currency in a taxable portfolio can be expressed by the second formula here. Accrual equivalent returns. So a useful way to summarize the impact of taxes on portfolio returns is to calculate an accrual equivalent after-tax return. It is a tax-free return that, if accrued annually, produces the same after-tax accumulation as the taxable portfolio. The accrual equivalent returns is a way to measure tax drag. An accrual equivalent tax rate finds the annual accrual tax rate that would produce the same after-tax accumulation as a tax system based in whole or in part on a deferred realized gains basis. It recognizes that deferring taxes through unrealized gains does not eliminate the tax liability, but moves the payment through time. So we've got the present value times 1 plus the return on accrual equivalents. The power of n is our future value. Here's an example, and note that it's always less than r, and it's smaller as it incorporates annual taxes and deferred capital gains tax on realized gains. So here's an example. A $100,000 portfolio has an after-tax accumulation in 5 years of $138,662. What is the return, the accrual equivalent return? Now to solve this you need to use logs. So for the purposes of this course, we're not going to go into that. But just bear in mind that the return on the accrual equivalent return is always less than r. And the accrual equivalent tax rate. So it's the rate that's derived from the accrual equivalent return. It is the hypothetical tax rate, TAE, that produces an after-tax return equivalent to the accrual equivalent return. This is the formula. The rate times 1 minus the hypothetical tax rate, the accrual equivalent tax rate, is equal to the return on accrual equivalents. It's a measure of tax efficiency. It's used to inform clients of the effect of rebalancing, and it's used to assess future tax law changes. Using data from previous examples, the return is 8% times 1 minus the tax on equivalent accruals equals 0.675%. The hypothetical tax rate is equal to 15.5%. So that rate is much lower than the marginal tax rate on ordinary income and only slightly higher than the favourable rate on dividends and capital gains in that example, because a relatively small proportion, i.e. about 5% of the portfolio's returns, is generated from highly taxed income. So that accrual equivalent tax rate can be used in several ways. It can be used to measure the tax efficiency of different asset classes or portfolio management styles. It illustrates to clients the tax impact of lengthening the average holding periods of stocks they own. And it can be used to assess the impact of future tax law changes. If the client's tax rate is likely to change in the future, the manager can determine the impact of the expected change on the accrual equivalent tax rate. The future tax rate could change for several reasons, such as tax law changes, changes in client circumstances, or the client taking advantage of tax rules. For example, a